Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future deep dives.
Yes, welcome back.
Today, we're diving into a topic that's been a source of intense debate for decades, especially here in India. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act of 1958.
Or AFSPA for short, as it's
Yeah,
commonly known.
right. AFSPA.
Mm.
Whether you're a UPSC aspirant gearing up for GS3 internal security or just someone who wants to understand a critical piece of Indian legislation, this deep dive is for you.
Absolutely. It's a complex topic, but super important.
Yeah. So to really grasp AFSPA, we need to travel back in time to the 1950s when India was facing rising violence, particularly in the Northeast.
The Northeast back then was really grappling with unrest and violence, and state governments were struggling to maintain control. It was a challenging situation.
So picture this. The usual law enforcement mechanisms, the ones laid out in the Criminal Procedure Code and the Indian Penal Code, they weren't enough to deal with the intensity of the situation.
They were designed for a different kind of scenario and just weren't cutting it.
And that's where the need for AFSPA came in. It was like, okay, we need something more to handle this.
Right. And it's crucial to remember that AFSPA isn't just one law. It actually refers to two separate pieces of legislation.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, one was passed in 1958 for the Northeast, and then another one came in 1990 for Jammu and Kashmir.
I see. So two different laws, but both aimed at tackling similar challenges.
Exactly. Both are designed to deal with insurgency and terrorism. They arose from slightly different contexts, but they give the armed forces similar powers.
Okay, so like two sides of the same coin.
Kind of, yeah. And a key concept you'll keep bumping into when you're looking at AFSPA is this term, disturbed area.
Disturbed area, right. What exactly does that mean?
It's not just, a casual term. It has a very specific legal definition. Under AFSPA, a disturbed area is a region formally declared as facing unrest. And this declaration can be made by the governor of a state, the administrator of a union territory, or by the central government.
Oh, so it's a pretty serious declaration then.
It is, yeah. And this unrest could be due to various factors: religious, racial, linguistic differences, you name it. Anything that leads to significant unrest can be grounds for declaring an area disturbed.
Okay, that makes sense. So what happens once an area is declared disturbed? What changes?
Well, that's when things get interesting. It's like flipping a switch that grants the armed forces operating in that region a whole bunch of special powers.
Special powers, huh? Sounds pretty serious.
It is. Think of it like this. A regular street suddenly transforming into a high-security zone. The rules change drastically. And these special powers under AFSPA, well, they're pretty potent. Like, they have the right to use force, even lethal force.
Wow, okay, so they can actually use deadly force if they believe it's necessary?
Yeah, if they think someone is acting against the law, they can use force to stop them. And it's not just that. They can also arrest people without needing a warrant.
Really? Without a warrant?
Yeah, and they can search premises based on suspicion, again, without a warrant. They even have the authority to destroy arms dumps, fortified positions, or any shelters they think are being used for illegal activities.
So we're talking about some pretty serious authority here.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about significant powers given to the armed forces in these areas. And just to give you a current picture, AFSPA is being enforced in parts of Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Manipur, Mizoram, Nagaland, and of course, Jammu and Kashmir.
So as you can imagine, it's a situation with many different perspectives and arguments. People have very strong opinions about AFSPA.
Definitely. It's a topic that really gets people talking, and for good reason. There are valid points raised on all sides.
Absolutely. So let's break down some of those arguments. Let's start with why some folks believe AFSPA is crucial, even essential.
Okay, so those who support AFSPA, they often highlight the need for security, especially in regions that are dealing with a lot of instability and violence. They argue that the regular legal provisions, like those under the CRPC and IPC, just aren't powerful enough or fast enough to handle situations like intense insurgency or terrorism.
So basically they're saying that in those extreme situations, you need a more immediate response, a stronger hand to deal with the threat.
Exactly. They believe that delaying action in those situations by going through the usual legal processes could actually risk lives and make the situation even worse. It's like, if a small fire breaks out, you don't wait for the fire department. You grab a fire extinguisher and put it out immediately.
Right, because waiting could have disastrous consequences.
Exactly. And supporters of AFSPA also point to past instances where withdrawing it led to an increase in violence. They see it as proof that sometimes you need those strong measures in place to maintain peace.
So it's about preventing things from escalating, from spiraling out of control.
Right. And then there's the whole issue of modern warfare, the way conflicts are fought these days. It's not like traditional warfare anymore.
Yeah, it's all about guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks, and hiding in the shadows.
Exactly. And they argue that dealing with this kind of asymmetric warfare requires exceptional measures. You need to be able to respond quickly and decisively to protect civilians and the soldiers who are operating in really dangerous environments.
So for them, AFSPA is a necessary tool, even if it's not perfect, to bring about peace and stability in these volatile regions. It's about creating that sense of security, both for the people who live there and the soldiers on the ground.
Yes, that's their perspective. And it's one we need to understand even if we don't necessarily agree with it completely. But of course, this is just one side of the story. There's another perspective, one filled with concerns about potential abuse of power, human rights violations, and the impact of AFSPA on everyday people living in these areas.
Yeah, and that's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive. We'll be looking at the counter-arguments to AFSPA, the criticisms leveled against it, and why some people believe it does more harm than good. So stay tuned for that.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how AFSPA kind of becomes this clash point between security and human rights, like trying to balance two completely different things at the same time.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. It's what makes this whole topic so tricky, right? How do you ensure security without stepping on people's fundamental rights in the process?
Exactly. And that's a major concern for those who are critical of AFSPA. They say that giving such broad powers to the armed forces, especially without strong safeguards in place, well, it just opens the door for potential abuse. We've seen so many allegations of things like fake encounters, extrajudicial killings, and other serious human rights violations, especially in areas where AFSPA is being used.
It's not just activists or human rights groups who are raising these issues, right? I mean, even government committees in the judiciary have expressed concerns about AFSPA.
Oh, absolutely. Like the Jeevan Reddy Committee, remember? They were specifically tasked with reviewing AFSPO, and they ended up recommending getting rid of it altogether.
Wow, that's a pretty strong stance.
Yeah. They basically felt that AFSPA was way too heavy-handed, like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. They argued that you could achieve similar goals using existing laws, like the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, but with a much stronger focus on accountability and making sure human rights are being respected.
So they were saying you can have security without resorting to these extreme measures.
Yeah, that was their main point. And then you have the Justice Santosh Hegde Committee. They investigated those alleged fake encounters in Manipur, and they didn't hold back. They straight up called AFSPA a symbol of oppression.
Wow, that's a powerful statement.
It is, and it reflects how a lot of people living under AFSPA feel. They see it as a source of fear and distrust, not as a way to keep them safe.
It makes you think about how the perception of law enforcement can be so different depending on where you are and what you're experiencing. And what about the Justice Verma Committee? They looked into crimes against women, right? Did they have anything to say about AFSPA?
Yeah, they did. They were worried about how AFSPA could be used to protect people who commit sexual violence, essentially letting them get away with it. They cited cases like the Kunin Pashpur incident and the Thengjam Manorama case, both in Manipur, as examples of how the act can be misused in really horrible ways.
Those are really sensitive cases.
They are, and they highlight this point. When you give people exceptional powers, you also need ways to make sure those powers aren't abused. If you don't, you risk creating a system where people in authority can act without any consequences.
Which is a scary thought.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that the Second Administrative Reforms Commission also recommended repealing AFSPA. Did they have similar concerns?
Yeah, they did. They were worried about the potential for harm and questioned whether AFSPA was actually working. Like, had it really brought about lasting peace in these regions, despite being in place for decades?
So was it effective, or was it just prolonging the conflict?
Right, and that's the core argument of the critics. They say AFSPA might seem like a quick fix, but it doesn't really address the root causes of the problem.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg, right? Doesn't really solve anything.
Exactly. So even though the Supreme Court has upheld the constitutionality of AFSPA, it hasn't given the armed forces a free pass.
Meaning there are still limits on what they can do.
Absolutely. The judiciary has stressed the importance of using minimal force, sticking to the guidelines, and conducting thorough investigations whenever there are any deaths involving the armed forces.
So it's all about maintaining a delicate balance, finding a way to address security concerns while also protecting human rights and ensuring that the rule of law is being upheld.
Exactly. And that leads us to another question. If AFSPA is so controversial, are there other ways to handle this whole situation? Are there alternatives that might work better?
Right. Are there examples of where things were done differently and it actually worked out?
That's a great question. And I think we should look at the cases of Tripura and Mizoram. They both successfully withdrew AFSPA.
Yeah. They're really interesting cases, and they might offer some valuable lessons about how to approach this whole issue. Tripura and Mizoram, they're really interesting cases, aren't they? I mean, they both managed to withdraw AFSPA, and things seem to be okay.
Yeah, so what made them different? Like, did they just get lucky, or was there something else going on, some kind of special strategy?
Well, luck might have played a small part, but honestly, it is mainly because they took a very specific approach. They really focused on finding solutions through politics, not just through military force.
So instead of trying to just crush dissent, they tried to understand why people were upset in the first place. Exactly. Dialogue and negotiation were key. They brought different groups together, listened to their concerns, and tried to find common ground.
Sounds like a lot of work.
It was, and it definitely took time, but ultimately it was more effective than just, imposing AFSPA on everyone.
So it was like what we talked about earlier, treating the wound instead of slapping on a Band-Aid.
Exactly. They addressed those underlying issues that were causing the conflict. And along with those political solutions, they also focused on development. Things like investing in infrastructure, education, and creating job opportunities, giving people a chance to build a better life.
Makes sense. If people have hope for the future, they're less likely to resort to violence, right?
Right. And they also worked hard to build trust between the military and the local communities. It wasn't just about security operations. They got involved in community stuff, showing that the armed forces were there to help, not just control them.
So they were trying to change the whole dynamic from being seen as an occupying force to being more like partners.
Exactly, building bridges instead of walls. And that kind of trust takes time, It takes empathy and a real willingness to listen.
It's like a long-term relationship, not a one-night stand.
Exactly. It's about a real commitment. So yeah, the cases of Tripura and Mizoram show that withdrawing AFSPA isn't just about making a decision. It's about a whole bunch of things.
It's about political solutions, development, and trust building.
You got it. It's a whole package deal.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive, I gotta say. ASPA is definitely one of those topics that you can't just look at superficially.
Absolutely. There are no easy answers, but understanding the complexities, looking at different perspectives, and talking about it openly are all important steps if we want to find a better way forward, a way that prioritizes both security and human rights.
Well said. And for all our listeners out there, especially those getting ready for the UPSC exams, I think the key takeaway here is to go beyond just memorizing facts and figures about AFSPA.
Right. Don't just try to cram information. Dig deeper. Understand the history, the arguments, the alternatives, and then form your own opinion.
All about critical thinking, right?
Exactly. Be able to analyze things, weigh different sides, and come to your own conclusion.
And don't forget, AFSPA isn't just some abstract topic. It has a real impact on people's lives.
Oh, absolutely. And their stories, their experiences, they're essential if you really want to understand this whole issue.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. Thanks so much for joining us.
It was my pleasure.
And to all our amazing listeners, don't forget to like and subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on future deep dives. We'll see you next time.